Hi, Shawn Ravenfire here with, I'm going to say the final episode of this series, the last of the arguments about God. And let's see what we got here. Last episode we went through the evolution act. Now we're back in the ontological act. And our first of the episode, of this particular episode, is an argument for the existence of God, reification fallacy. That's it. Seriously. I had a guy once just say reification fallacy over and over again, and that was his entire argument. And I had to Google it, look up the definition, and interpret what the fuck he was trying to say. Now, I've already talked about logical fallacies and how I think we're overusing them and a little too eager to just jump onto everything that's a logical fallacy and say, I caught you in a fallacy, therefore you're wrong. This one is going from the other direction. Reification fallacy basically goes something like this. You argue that something does not exist because it does not exist physically and only exists abstractly, and that's wrong because things that exist only abstractly do exist. First of all, says who? I mean, what? You're wrong because you're wrong? Is that it? Like, you're wrong to say that abstract things don't exist because abstract things do exist, QED? No, QE not even close to D. I mean, that's not a fallacy. That's just, you're wrong. And second of all, it assumes that we already know that God doesn't exist in the real sense, but does exist in the idea sense, and we're just arguing over whether or not to classify an idea as real or unreal. That's really not important. I mean, we pretty much, if that were all it was, we could just agree to disagree about that. The real issue here is, does God exist in a real sense, not a figurative sense, in a real sense? Are we just going to throw that out and go, okay, look, we all know there is a real God, so obviously all these people who say there's a God are arguing that the idea of God is a real idea. No. The people who are arguing that there's a God are arguing that there's a God. A real one. That's the thing we're discussing. Don't try to get us off track. Another argument for the existence of God: disbelief comes from fear of responsibility. Basically, this one is saying that the only reason why a person would want to be an atheist is because if there's a God, then not believing and not following God's will and not living a good life will send you to hell, and the idea of hell is so horrible that they simply refuse to accept it and block it out of their worldview and convince themselves that there isn't a God. First of all, that's not the only reason not to think there's a God. There's also, gee, I just don't think there's a God. That's a good reason. But let's just say that a person didn't want to believe there was a hell because the idea was too frightening. And there's no reason to think that there definitely is a hell. That's just a belief. Maybe there's a hell, maybe there's not. It's not obvious that there's a hell. But let's just say that that there is a reason to believe in a hell and a person doesn't want to believe it. Why don't they just not believe in hell? I mean, there are plenty of people who believe in God but not hell. There are plenty of people who believe in all sorts of supernatural things, but in a good way. Why can't they just be one of them? Because they simply don't think there's a God. Simple as that. An argument for the existence of God. And this one goes something like this. I don't know why, I just have a feeling. Good. I will accept that one. I know there are a lot of logic people and skeptics who will just shit all over that one and go, oh, you can't base a belief system on that. Well, yeah, it's a hell of a lot better than any of the other arguments. It's the best one so far. It's the only one that actually makes any kind of sense. The only one I can actually understand. Here's an argument for the existence of God. Something must be the greatest. If there's a finite number of things, and for everything that there is, there's something greater, sooner or later you've got to come to the greatest thing. And let's just call the greatest thing God. Well, there's a few holes in this argument. First of all, the greatest thing doesn't necessarily have to be the greatest thing in every category. Maybe the smartest thing isn't the same thing as the strongest thing. Maybe the strongest thing isn't the same thing as the fastest thing. Maybe the fastest thing isn't the same thing as the most moral thing. Second of all, if there is a universally greatest thing, we don't necessarily know that there's one greatest thing. There could be two or more things that are tied for greatest. And third, even if there is a greatest thing, one greatest thing in every category, we don't necessarily know that it's that much greater than the second greatest thing. Maybe it only beat us out by a small margin. So in this sense, there's really no reason to think that the greatest thing has to be the greatest thing. In other words, God. It could just be something that's kind of a little bit greater than the next greatest thing. Next argument. This one is an argument against God. More specifically, this one is an argument against Exodus. Earlier, I mentioned that Genesis wasn't the first book of the Bible that was written. It's the first one listed, but it's not the first one written. The first one was Exodus, and the Hebrew religion was based around the story of Exodus, and the Jewish religion, and then that spawned off the Christian and Muslim and Rastafarian and Baha'i religions, all broke off of that. But going back to specifically the Abrahamic God, there is no archaeological record of the Jews ever having wandered in the desert for 40 years. That's a big hole in the story of Exodus. You'd think that that many people would have left some trace of their existence behind, right? Well, not necessarily. First of all, it's a desert. I mean, it's very easy to lose something in a desert. I mean, look how long it took us to find the tomb of King Tut. And that's when we knew approximately where to look. I mean, deserts are deserts. There are sandstorms. Things get buried. Things get lost. Second of all, that many people. How many is that many people? How many Jews were wandering in the desert? We don't know. I mean, when we visualize the Exodus, we picture, Cecil B. DeMille's Ten Commandments. We think of, there's this huge, massive population. It could have only just been a few people. It could have just been like 20 or 30 people wandering. In fact, some archaeologists say they've even found cave drawings from people who were asking their God to help them to be delivered out of servitude that date from about that time period. So it could have just been a really small number. Maybe they weren't building the pyramids. Maybe they were building like a hut somewhere far away from the pyramids. Could have just been a very small number of Egyptians and a very small number of Jews. Scales get exaggerated. I mean, remember, the Bible, most of the people in the Bible were fishermen. I mean, fishermen do tend to exaggerate, let's be honest. Hey, I caught a fish so big it swallowed Jonah. They're fish stories. That's a little clip from one of my stand-up acts I just threw in there because it was relevant. But yeah, the Exodus could have been just a smaller number of people, leaving only a smaller number of traces that could be easily covered up by the desert. It's possible. An argument for the existence of God: angels. People see angels. They're messengers. Well, here's the problem with angels. And like I said, I believe ghost stories, but angel stories, they're more like alien stories. They're more culturally specific. Ghost stories are found all over the world. Angel stories are only found in parts of the world where people are taught to believe in angels. Now you might say, okay, let's say that the angels are the messengers of God, and they're only acting on behalf of the God of the people who worship that particular deity. Yeah, it's a stretch. You'd think that somebody would have noticed an angel sometime prior to the belief in angels. Now you could say that angels and gods, pagan gods, are the same thing. That actually holds up pretty well. You could just say that an angel is just a god in the service of another god. That's possible. But it is a stretch. I mean, and angel sightings are not nearly as common as ghost sightings. So just the fact that it's a smaller number means it's a little bit weaker evidence, I would say. An argument against the existence of God: morals change. If there's a God, then morality must be objective. There must be some objective right and wrong. But our interpretation of morality changes over time. How does this happen? Well, do the morals really change, or is it just that we act on them differently? Think about it. We say that slavery is wrong. Long time ago, we said slavery was okay. Was it okay? Was slavery right and then became wrong? Or was slavery always wrong and we just didn't want to admit it until later? I think that there actually is an objective right and wrong. Whether there's a God or not, there is an objective right and wrong. We know that killing someone is bad. Okay? Whether we want to admit that it's bad or not is a different matter, but there is a definite right and wrong. Sometimes we don't always know what's right or wrong. Sometimes we don't want to do what's right or wrong, but there is a right and a wrong, whether there's a God or not. Next argument. An argument against the existence of God, or just against acknowledging God through religion. Religion teaches people to hate each other. That's what religion does. It teaches us to hate each other. It makes us all hate each other. Ooh, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you because I'm religious. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Religion doesn't teach hate. Some religions, some, not all, but some, teach judgment. Judgment is not the same thing. You can judge somebody without hating them. Now, some religions say you shouldn't judge people. But some religions say, yeah, judge away. But don't hate. I mean, a judge in a court, he doesn't hate the defendant. He's just judging. I don't know any religion. I've never heard of any religion that says, go out and hate each other. There is one, and you're probably going to say, what about the Westboro Baptists? Okay, first of all, it's a bad example because it's a very tiny cult. Second of all, they don't say you should hate or we should hate. They say God hates. That's a different thing. And even that's kind of... I'm not entirely convinced that they really believe what they're saying. I think they're trolls. I really think there is a definite possibility that this might be some elaborate form of trolling. And I really don't... And if they really are honest about being haters, I don't think they hate because of religion. I think they're haters because they're haters. And they're just using religion as an excuse to get away with being haters. But if you look at any of the major world religions, there is one word that they say so much it becomes almost annoying to hear. And that word is love. Love, 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 love. every religious teacher just can't shut up about how much we all have to love each other. How's that teaching hate? What, because some of the people do hate? That doesn't mean they were taught to hate. That's like saying that if a student is bad at math, the teacher must have taught him not to do math. Well, no, the teacher taught him to do math, he just didn't listen. And if a person who is religious does not love other people, it's not because he was taught not to love. He was taught to love, he just didn't listen. So it's not the religion that teaches hate, it's just some people are assholes, that's all. Now, if you hate somebody else, you're a hater. Nobody made you a hater. You're just a hater yourself. Argument for the existence of God, and this is a very popular one, a very, very well-known one. This is Pascal's wager. Mr. Pascal says that if there is not a God, then it doesn't matter whether you believe there's a God or not, you're going to die and go nowhere. However, if there is a God, then you should believe in God, because if you don't, then you're going to go to hell. So therefore, you should just believe in God just as a precaution, as insurance, just in case. There are a number of things wrong with this argument. First of all, it assumes that if there is not a God, then believing in God doesn't make any practical difference. Actually, it does make a practical difference. You don't get to sleep in on Sunday. You put money in a collection basket. There are a lot of things, and some people say religion causes violence and hatred, and I just said no, it doesn't, but let's just say it does. Doesn't that have to be considered? Believing in God could have other consequences in this world, even if there is no next. Second of all, it assumes that if there's a God, there's an afterlife, and if there's not a God, there's not an afterlife. And as I said previously, these things are not connected, necessarily. There could be an afterlife with no God. There could be a God with no afterlife. Third, it doesn't consider the possibility of a God who doesn't want to be believed in. It assumes that if there's a God, he's going to reward you for believing and punish you for disbelieving. That's a pretty big assumption, isn't it? I mean, what if God rewards disbelief and punishes belief? Or what if God doesn't care if you believe it or not, but punishes you unless you stand on your head? There are an infinite number of possibilities to consider. And finally, it assumes, let's just say for the sake of argument that Pascal's right, and if there's no God, then belief or disbelief makes no practical difference, and if there is a God, then he wants to be believed in and will reward you for believing in him and punish you for not. It assumes that believing just for safety's sake counts. If you say, I'm just going to say I believe in God, even though I don't, just so I don't go to hell, what makes you think that when you die, God's not going to say, well, you didn't really believe in me. You were just saying that. It assumes that that kind of insurance is acceptable to God. This is a very specific interpretation of God that we're talking about here, and it completely ignores all other possible interpretations. Next argument. This one is an argument for God. This one is the liar, lunatic, Lord argument. And it goes a little something like this. Actually, this started out as an argument against people who believe that Jesus was a great teacher and the greatest person alive, but not God. This was a belief held by people such as Thomas Jefferson, and as a matter of fact, I have a copy of the Jefferson Bible right here, the Life and Morals of Jesus of Nazareth, extracted textually from the Gospels by Thomas Jefferson. It's a good read, check it out. But the liar-lunatic argument, the liar-lunatic Lord argument, goes something like this. It says that Jesus claimed to be the Son of God, therefore he was one of three things. He could have been a liar, he could have been a lunatic, or he could have been the Lord. He could have been telling the truth. If he was not telling the truth, if he was a liar or a lunatic, then he was not a great person and should not be listened to. So, really, you basically have to choose between not listening to Jesus at all or accepting him as the Son of God and becoming a Christian. Here's the problem with this. It doesn't consider the possibility that he was being misquoted. Maybe he didn't claim to be the Son of God. Maybe we just assume that. Or let's say he did call himself the Son of God. Maybe he wasn't speaking literally. Maybe he just meant that as a figure of speech, as in we're all God's children. We've got to consider these as alternate possibilities. So really there's 5 possibilities here. He could have been a lunatic, he could have been lying, he could have been the Son of God, he could have been speaking metaphorically, or he could have been misquoted. Or a 6th possibility, he could have been a fictional character. Although, I don't know if that's really valid, because if Jesus is only known as a person who said all those cool things, and if he didn't exist, then whoever did say those things and put them in the book, then just call that person Jesus, and it works just the same. I mean, if we're talking about Jesus as a historic figure as opposed to a religious figure, whoever said that, we would call him the guy, so it works. But getting back to the liar or lunatic, we assume that if he was a liar or a lunatic, that he shouldn't be listened to. Well, not necessarily. A liar can be right sometimes. A lunatic can be right sometimes. Vincent van Gogh, he wasn't quite right in the head, but he was a great painter. I mean, a lot of people had psychological or neurological problems. I mean, Tesla had obsessive compulsive disorder. You know, Teddy Roosevelt had a hyperactivity behavioral disorder. I mean, a lot of people had strange behavioral quirks. Doesn't necessarily mean that the things they did are not worth anything. And as for the liar possibility, he might have been lying just to get people's attention. Sometimes a person might lie to get you to believe a truth. I mean, you might say, you should all be good to each other. Why should we listen to you? Because I'm God. Oh, okay. He might have been lying for what he considered a good cause. That's a possibility that has to be considered. So the point is that seeing Christ as a historical figure and a really good person, even if not the Son of God, is still a valid point. And also another possibility is he could have been a God but not the God. He could have been just a demigod or like a lesser God. That's a possibility too. The second aspect of the liar, lunatic, Lord argument is originally this was made as a counterpoint to people who said that Jesus was a great man but not necessarily a divine or supernatural being. But some people have expanded on this argument and said, well, since there are 3 possibilities, that means that there's a very realistic chance that he was the Son of God because it's one of the 3 possibilities. Well, not necessarily. I mean, just because you list it as a possibility doesn't mean it's a realistic possibility. I mean, okay, am I about to be attacked by a werewolf? Well, the answer is either yes or no. Well, since one of the possible answers is yes, it could happen. Well, no. I mean, just because I considered it for speculative purposes doesn't mean that it's something to be realistically considered. I mean, I'm not saying that we shouldn't realistically consider that Christ may have been something supernatural, but we shouldn't consider it just because it's listed as one of the possibilities. Next argument. Argument for the existence of God. Subatomic particles meet the criteria of being timeless, omnipresent, all-creating, etc., etc. Basically, all the things that we attribute to God, subatomic particles fit those qualifications. Therefore, we could say that subatomic particles are sort of a God. All of the criteria? maybe omnipresent, maybe all creating, maybe many things, maybe existing without time or space, quantum tunneling, transcending the laws of physics as we understand them. But didn't I list one of the criteria for being God as intelligence? Are subatomic particles intelligent? More specifically, are they self-aware? Maybe they're aware of the interactions with other particles, but are they aware of themselves? If the quantum field of the universe is aware of itself, that would certainly not only imply, but for all intents and purposes, prove a pantheistic universe. But there is no reason for me or anyone else to think that a subatomic particle or a field of subatomic particles is self-aware. So until you got that, you're not really making a point. Next argument. This is my most hated argument ever. This is the worst one yet. I want to smack somebody every time I hear this one. Argument against the existence of God. No one believes in Zeus anymore. We all wised up and stopped believing in the pagan gods. Why can't we wise up and stop believing in the Christian God as well? First of all, nobody believes in the pagan gods anymore. Yes, they do. Yes, a lot of people do. Okay, and I'm not just talking about fringe groups. Okay, I'm not just talking about some of the more modern neo-pagans like the Wiccans and the Neo-Druids and the Asatrus. No, I'm talking like India. Okay, polytheism isn't endangered. It's certainly not gone. There are polytheists in the world, a lot of them. Second, in this Eurocentric universe in which we live, where the Western Europeans stopped believing in the pagan gods, why did they stop believing? Did they really wise up? Did they become scientific? Did they send a probe into heaven? Did they take a blood sample from a deity and put it under a microscope for analysis? No. No, the people who stopped believing in the pagan gods stopped believing because they converted to Christianity or Islam. It wasn't that they didn't want to believe in the pagan gods anymore. They just found a god they liked better. And in fact, a lot of them in Western Europe particularly, they didn't even abandon the pagan gods. They just rededicated them, changed them to angels and saints. And the thing is, a lot of them didn't even convert willingly. A lot of them were forced to convert. I mean, if I put a gun to your head and said, say there are no aliens, and you say, okay, because you don't want to get shot in the head, I can't come back later and say, well, there's obviously no aliens because look at all the people who stopped believing in them. Yeah, because somebody put a gun to your head. This is a terrible argument, and I want to smack somebody in the face every time they bring this argument up. Nobody believes in the pagan gods anymore. Yeah, they do. And they stopped believing in the pagan gods because they didn't make sense. No, they stopped believing in the pagan gods because they became Christians and Muslims. And by the way, the pagan gods, they make a whole lot more sense than the God of Abraham, and yet we're so dismissive of them because we're so prejudiced against the past. We say, oh, they didn't understand physics or engineering or chemistry, so they must not have understood religion as well as we do now. Well, we learned about physics and chemistry and engineering. We didn't learn anything new about religion, did we? We didn't get new information. We just changed the way we felt about it. The pagan gods, they don't contradict themselves the way that the God of Abraham does. And yet we just say, oh, well, I'm going to spend hours arguing about the God of Abraham, but the pagan gods, I'm not even going to dignify them with an argument. This hat was almost full of arguments about the God of Abraham. Almost none, very few about the pagan gods. That should tell you something. We're just not considering them worth discussing. Okay, next argument. Argument against God. Paradox. Perfection and free will. God is perfect, then how can he have free will? God is an intelligent being, he should have free will, but how could he be capable of making a decision if he is compelled by his nature to only make right decisions? Then he would be inert, he would not have free will. That is a paradox. You're right, it is a paradox. So I'm going to put a pin in that one, but with a disclaimer. It is a paradox that only applies to the God of Abraham, not to the pagan gods. Still think the pagan gods aren't worth discussing? By the way, it was not on purpose that was the next one I picked up. I just really lucked out with that one. Next argument. Argument against God, specifically Jesus. Again, Jesus' miracles are small. If Jesus is really God, couldn't he just turn the sky ablaze with a big flashing neon sign saying, "Hey, look at me, everybody, I'm God"? Why is he doing little things like turning water into wine? Something that could easily be explained as a magician's trick. If he's really God, wouldn't he do bigger things? Well, not necessarily. First of all, is turning water into wine really enough to convince people that you're the Son of God? Well, it worked, didn't it? I mean, he's the single most well-known person in all of history. So, obviously, he's doing something right, if that was his goal. But let's just consider, let's put myself in his sandals for the time being and say, what would I do in his place? What would I do if I were God? And again, we're not even getting into all the other possibilities that he might have had limits on his powers, that putting himself into humanoid form caused limitations to his powers, or that he may have been a demigod. At least one of his parents was human, so he may have only been like a half-blood, or he may have been just a god, but not the god. He might not have been all-powerful. I'm not even going to get into all those possibilities. I'll just acknowledge them right now, which I just did. I just confused myself. But let's just say that, let's say I were all-powerful, and I wanted to present my message to the world. What would I do? Honestly, I'd probably do pretty much the same thing. I mean, I'm going to be honest. I would not do big dramatic things. Because, first of all, I wouldn't want the messenger to be bigger than the message. And second of all, I wouldn't want to rob people of the joy of being good to others and teaching others to be good. I wouldn't want to be the only one telling people this. I would want them to pass it along forward. Here's my message, pass it on. This way, it's not just God being good to everybody, it's people being good to each other. That's probably the best way to go about it. That's the way I would go about it. So there actually is a method to the madness. Next argument. Here's another stupid one. Here's another stupid one. An argument against Jesus having existed at all. They made a documentary about this one. I didn't see the whole documentary, but I saw a clip. And it was a promotional clip, so I'm assuming they were showing us the best part. They wouldn't show us the only dumb part in it. They want me to buy the documentary, so... But just based on the argument that I got in this clip, it went a little something like this. the Christians made up Jesus based on stories of other gods that we know for a fact didn't really exist, and the proof that they made it up based on these other stories is the fact that the church has been covering up the truth and keeping people from finding out about the stories of all these other pagan gods. And we know that the church has been covering this up because we can ask people on the street if they have heard of the gods of Osiris and Dionysus and Horus, etc., etc., and Mithras, etc., etc., and a lot of times the people don't know who they are. Wow. There are so many things wrong with that argument, and I'm going to take them in order. First of all, he has things in common with other gods that we know didn't really exist and were fictional. How do we know they were fictional? Maybe Osiris and Mithras and Dionysus, maybe they were all real. You ever consider that? Maybe there are a lot of gods, and coming back from the dead and healing the sick and doing things like that are just things that gods do. Maybe these things are just, maybe the reason Jesus did all the same things as the other gods is because that's normal for a god. You got to consider that as a possibility. Second, let's just say that it was made up based on other made-up stories. The church has been covering up the truth. What church? The church? There's more than one. And they don't have absolute power. Usually when somebody says the church, they're talking about the Catholic Church. They don't have absolute power. They don't have the power to censor speech or ban books. But let's just say they did. Let's just say that there was one church that had total power over the whole world and could keep us from finding out about all these other gods. Well, then how the hell do I know about them? Why is it that I can go to any library and look up a book on other gods? Hang on one second. Here's a book on ancient gods. And here's another book on ancient gods. This is just coming off my bookshelf right here. And here's a book which discusses pagan gods. And let's see what else we got. Oh, here's a really big book on ancient gods. Yeah, there's a lot of them, aren't there? And I've got a bunch more here. Yeah, I've got a whole lot of them. Telling me that the ancient gods are kept a secret because we can't learn about them. You can walk into any library, you can Google them. Anybody can find out about them. How is this a secret? Okay, let's say they are covering it up. Where's the proof that it's being covered up? The proof is that people on the street don't know about them. Well, they walked up to people on the street in this documentary on camera. These are the people trying to prove this point. And asked, and just listed a whole bunch of pagan gods and said, have you heard of these other gods? And they hadn't heard of all of them. They heard of some of them. What? They've heard of some of them, and that proves that all of them were kept a secret? Okay, even the ones they hadn't heard of. Does that mean it's being covered up? I mean, if I walk up to somebody and I say, hey, you, stranger, what's the atomic weight of fermium? I don't know. Aha! There must be a conspiracy to cover up the atomic weight of fermium from public knowledge. Maybe they don't know every name on that list just because people do not know everything. That's why we have the internet. That's why we have libraries. Because people don't just walk around containing all human knowledge in their heads at all times. Tell me the church is covering up all the knowledge of all the other gods because some random people on the street aren't completely all-knowing about everything pagan god related. That's ridiculous. Argument against the supernatural in general. Magic and miracles are not repeatable. I will grant you, they're not always repeatable. So how do they work? Why can't they be repeated? I mean, if you claim to be a sorcerer or a prophet or a psychic, let's say that you claim to be a psychic, you could see the future. Phone rings, you know who it's going to be before you pick it up. You're a psychic. Then you go into a laboratory and they test your abilities and you cannot predict anything. Not repeatable, is it? Well, we don't really know how it works, do we? We don't know what the conditions necessary are for psychic ability to work if it does work. Think about it. Let's say I found a radio. I turn a knob, music comes out. And I say, hey, I turn this knob, music comes out. Let's see if this is repeatable. I take it to the next person, and I try it again. And I turn the knob, and nothing happens. It just makes a staticky noise. It's not repeatable. But what if the problem is that the batteries went dead in the radio? And I just didn't know that the radio required batteries. Or maybe the problem is I took it out of range of the radio station and I just didn't know that there was a limited range. Or maybe the problem is that there's sunspot interference and I just didn't know that sunspots existed, or if they did, that they interfered with radio signals. The point is, we don't know what makes a psychic if they are. If psychics are real, or if sorcerers are real, we don't know what makes them work. So we don't know what conditions have to be met in order for their abilities to manifest. The first caveman rubbed a couple of sticks together. Fire appeared. Hey, this is a good thing. We should do this every time we're cold and it's dark and we want to be warm and be able to see in the dark. Next day, grabs a couple of sticks, rubs them together. No fire. This time the sticks were damp. This is the first time he ever tried to make a fire. Didn't occur to him that maybe wet sticks don't work. So he's just going to look around for everything that might be wrong. There was a bird on that tree yesterday and there's not one there today. Maybe in order to make fire there has to be a bird on that tree. Put a bird on that tree? No. The wind was blowing from that direction. Let's change towards the wind. Maybe that'll... No. It was a full moon yesterday and it's not a full moon today. I'll try it next time there's a full moon. Rub the sticks together. No. Huh. I guess fire is just a fluke. I guess I can't make fire whenever I want. Wait a minute. The sticks were wet. The sticks were dry before. Maybe I have to use dry sticks and not wet sticks. Fire! You have to try a lot of things before you figure it out. And when it comes to the supernatural, the metaphysical, we know about as much about it as cavemen know about the physical. We are still trying to figure it out. We're still in the trial and error stage. I'm going to tell you, I've had personal experiences with people who have claimed to have psychic abilities. And I'm going to tell you, I never see a person do something psychic when they want to. It always seems to happen when they're not expecting it. Like whenever they say, okay, sit down, I'm going to give you a psychic reading now, and they're always way off. But when they're just not even trying, when they're just sitting there, it's like, ooh, I just got something. They're usually right. So apparently, psychic ability, or magic abilities, or prophetic abilities, or miracles just seem to happen when they want to. Or maybe they happen based on a set of conditions that we haven't quite figured out yet. Maybe we're trying to figure out if we need a bird on the branch when we should be asking if the sticks are wet. There's just a lot to consider. Just because magic isn't repeatable doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means we don't know how it works. Argument for the existence of God: demonic possessions and exorcisms. Again, this seems to be very culturally specific. You never really see a lot of demonic possessions. I mean, you see and hear about demonic possessions in tribal cultures that have nothing to do with the Judeo-Christian tradition, but it seems to be very different, radically different, and really pretty similar to natural explainable diseases of the mind and of the body. So they're worth noting, but the thing is that in Western civilization, where there is Western medicine, they're very rare. It seems that people tend to get possessed by demons where there really isn't a lot of Western medicine, or before the time of Western medicine, which makes me think that there must be a biological explanation for it. It just seems more rational. Argument for the existence of God. Again, that's not saying that it's a definite no, it's just saying it doesn't seem as likely as some of the other things that have come up. Argument for the existence of God: they found Noah's Ark. The hell they have. First of all, the Ark was made of wood, okay? And there probably was a real guy with a real boat and a real flood and some real animals, okay. It's a well-known thing. It's found in several cultures around that same geographical area, and they found soil samples in that area that suggest that there was a flood around that time. So, okay, yeah, there probably was a local flood and a local guy with a boat. Whether he's called Noah or is he a Sudra or Utnapishtim or, whatever. But there probably was a guy with a boat. The boat was made of wood. Wood rots. What are the chances that you're going to find it thousands of years later? Let's just say that a boat did survive. What are the chances that it's going to be that boat? What are the chances that you're going to find the exact boat? And let's just say, hypothetically, a boat survived and it was the right boat. How are you going to know? Did Noah autograph it? The SS boat that belongs to Noah and is the one from that famous Ark story? But let's just say, hypothetically, you found the actual Noah's Ark. Well, we're not disputing that there was a guy with a boat in a flood. We know that. The question is, was it a global flood? Was it a flood sent by God? That's the real disagreement. I mean, that's like saying, here, this pen. I found this pen here, and I'm just going to say it was left by space aliens. Oh, look, here's the proof. Well, yeah, nobody was disputing that the pen was there. We were disagreeing about whether the aliens put it there. Likewise, just because you found the boat, even if it is the right boat, which is very unlikely, but even if you found the right boat, all that proves is that the story that we already knew was true. The thing that we're disputing isn't really proven. The thing about it being a global flood, that's not really proven by anything. We're just proving that there was a flood, which we already know. Alright, I've harped on that one enough. Argument against God: Occam's razor. That's in the lack of evidence, the simplest explanation is usually the right one. Well, that's not actually what Occam's razor says. If we're just going to go with simplicity, I mean, obviously science is very complex, and God just snapped his fingers and made everything happen is a very simple explanation, so that actually is the simpler explanation. But that's not what Occam's razor says. It says that the explanation that requires the least assumption is usually the correct one. In other words, oh man, I'm running out of analogies. Let's go back to the pen and the aliens again. Let's say that somebody put this pen on the table. It was either a person or a space alien. I know there was a person in the room, I don't know there was a space alien in the room. So it would be silly to think it was the alien that I don't know was here, when it could have just as easily been the human that I do know was here. This requires no assumption. First of all, it doesn't mean it's definitely the right answer. It just means it's usually the right answer. Second of all, that's when we're dealing with things that don't require a lot of additional assumption. When we're dealing with things that are beyond this world, we don't really have that much to work with. We have to go on assumptions. Where did the universe come from? Well, we don't know. So we can't assume it was a thing that we already know about because we don't know about it. What happens after we die? We can't assume that we know based on an assumption because we can't compare it to the thing that we know exists and don't have to assume because we don't know anything about it. So in that sense, when we're dealing with the unknown, the really unknown, there really isn't a lot of use for the razor. It's just when we're dealing with things that are on the border of what we understand, not way into the realms of the unknown. Okay. This one's a 2-for-1 deal. Argument for the existence of God. Science has never proven that there isn't one. Argument against the existence of God. Science has never proven that there is one. Okay, I gotta ask you people, what the hell do you think scientists do all day? You think they sit around trying to prove whether there's a God or not? Scientists are trying to cure cancer and build warp drives and make deodorant last longer and make the iPod smaller. They're doing practical things. They're doing practical things. And even if there is a scientist trying to work out whether there's a God or not, what kind of instruments are they going to use? Are they just going to go in the back room and get the God detector? They don't have one of those. They have no basis on which to make this determination. Think about it. Let's say I have a time machine, and I go back in time, and I didn't bring anything with me. It's just me in the past. And I talk to Sir Isaac Newton. And I say, Sir Isaac, there are these things called neutrinos. They're all around us, all the time, moving at the speed of light, passing through everything, passing through the earth, passing through our bodies, billions and billions and billions of them, all at once, all the time. Can you tell me if I'm telling the truth or not? Isaac Newton, one of the smartest people in history, would look at me and say, how am I going to prove or disprove that? I don't have the equipment. The equipment that I need to determine if there are neutrinos has not been invented yet, and will not be invented until about the 20th century. Smart guy, can't prove it because he doesn't have the equipment. Now, what kind of equipment would we need to prove whether there's a God or not? I don't know, it hasn't been invented yet. Maybe someday we'll invent that kind of equipment, but not today. So, if there's a God, we wouldn't be able to prove it anyway. And if there's not a God, we wouldn't be able to prove that anyway. At least not scientifically. Next argument is an argument for the existence of God. It's the improbability of life. Basically goes like this. The conditions for life on Earth are too specific for life to exist. It's too perfect. Could not have happened by accident. Must have been designed this way. The distance of Earth from the Sun, the composition of the atmosphere, the presence of liquid water, the size of the Earth, the gravity of the Moon. The Moon is very important. The tidal force is very important to stirring up proteins. All of this seems to be very specifically designed. Must have been on purpose. I would consider this a really good point if Earth were the only planet. But Earth is not the only planet. There are a lot of other ones. And as far as we can tell, so far, there's nothing on it. There's nothing on the others. They're all built wrong. So this is my question. If God designed Earth to be so perfect for life, why would he design a whole bunch of other planets the wrong way? Looks like trial and error. Wouldn't make any sense to do it any other way. I mean, why create a perfect planet and a whole bunch of imperfect ones? Let me just use an analogy. Let's say I'm going to tell you, I'm going to do something amazing. I'm going to flip a coin in the air and it's going to land right on its edge. It's going to land standing right on its edge. And you're going to say, no way. It's a magic trick. Watch. I flip a coin, it lands on its edge. What are you going to think? Are you going to think that I somehow made that happen by maybe a trick coin or something? Or are you going to think it was just luck? Well, if it was luck, it's pretty improbable. So you're going to think, no, you actually made that happen. That was intelligently caused. I don't know how you did it, but I know you did it. I know it wasn't just a coincidence. Okay, same scenario, except this time I say, I'm going to flip a coin and make it land on the edge. And this time I flip 1 billion coins in the air. One of them lands on the edge, and I point to that one and I go, look at that! How do you think I did that? You're going to look at me and go, that was luck. You flip that many coins, of course one of them is going to turn out right. If you really had powers, you'd have made them all stand on the edge. Just one? It was bound to happen eventually. So if other planets in the universe were full of space aliens that looked kind of human, I would consider that a strong argument for intelligent design. But the fact that we don't see that in the universe, and so far we're the only planet we found with people on it, makes it seem like a statistical anomaly. But let me tell you a funny story. When I first came up with this idea about comparing the Earth to a coin standing on its edge, there was a cat in the kitchen. Not this apartment. My last apartment, there was a cat that broke into my apartment, belonged to my neighbor. He found a crawl space between the walls and would sneak in. And he jumped onto my kitchen table. This table. And I said, you know what? There's no reason to think that God designed this world specifically, because it's like a coin standing on its edge. It's going to happen. If you got it right on the first try, I would consider that a miracle, but it didn't happen on the first try, so that suggests trial and error. I just got done saying that when the cat knocked a coin off this very table and it landed on its edge. I don't know what to make of that. Except possibly that God is a cat. I'm going to do one more of these.